For generations, the village of Norhill sat quietly at the edge of the forest, forgotten by maps and untouched by time. Life there was slow, simple, and safe, or at least it had been until the day that changed everything. It began not with screams or chaos but with silence, thick and unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. Birds stopped chirping, the wind paused in the trees, and the usual hum of life vanished. Elder Yusef, who had lived in the village for over 80 years, stood at the well in the center of the square and frowned as he watched the horizon. Something was wrong and he could feel it in his bones. That morning, the local farmer, Amir, had gone to check on his livestock near the tree line. His wife said he never returned. By noon, 2 of his goats wandered back into the village, their eyes wide, their fur streaked with what looked like gray ash. When his brothers went searching for him, they too disappeared. Fear settled over Norhill like a dark mist. People whispered behind closed doors and bolted their windows earlier than usual, confused and uneasy. Children were called indoors, and the old mosque's loudspeaker crackled with warnings from the village committee. Stay home. Do not enter the forest. Do not go alone. It wasn't until dusk that things took a darker turn. A young boy named Bilal came running down the main road, his hands shaking, his face pale. "They're coming," he gasped, barely able to speak. "Amir? He's not Amir anymore." He had seen him, his neighbor, but there was something terribly wrong with the man. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale and cracked like dried clay, and he moved like something not quite alive. With him were others, unrecognizable shapes dragging themselves toward the village from the forest. Some had tattered clothes, others showed signs of decay, but all of them moved with a single terrifying purpose. As night fell, the first scream tore through the air. It came from the southern edge where an old couple lived alone. By the time the villagers reached the house, it was too late. The door was splintered, the windows shattered, and inside, only silence and red handprints smeared on the walls. Panic surged. No one knew what to call them yet. Zombies wasn't a word Norhill had ever needed, but everyone recognized death when they saw it. The next hours were chaos. The villagers, armed with old tools, rusted weapons, and anything they could find, tried to defend their homes. Fires were lit to light the darkness. Men formed groups and patrolled the outer fields, while women and children huddled in basements and prayer halls. But they were unprepared. These things, these walking corpses, were relentless. They didn't run, didn't speak, didn't bleed. And worst of all, every person they caught became one of them. Within minutes, Imran, a young schoolteacher who had only moved to Norhill 3 months earlier, found himself leading a group of villagers into the main square, trying to keep order. He had no experience in battle, no training in combat, but something in him snapped into place. "We need a perimeter. Barricade the roads. Get everyone to the mosque, reinforce the doors," he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. His orders gave people a purpose. For now it was enough to stop the full collapse. As midnight approached, the air was thick with smoke from burning fields, and the sound of distant groans echoed through the night. The infected were increasing. No one knew how far this had spread. Was it just Norhill or was the whole country falling? They had no phones, no internet. The only working radio played static. But it was clear to everyone, this was not just an attack. This was a beginning. Inside the mosque, the remaining villagers gathered in silence. Mothers clutched their children. Elders recited prayers. And Imran stood near the door, gripping a wooden bat, his knuckles white. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing: the world had changed. Norhill, once invisible to history, had become the front line in a war no one saw coming. And if they were going to survive, they'd have to become something more than villagers. They would have to become defenders. Because the undead weren't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. By the time dawn approached, Norhill had already lost a quarter of its population. Smoke from burning haystacks and broken homes curled into the morning sky, and the air reeked of soot and something far worse, decay. The village that had once woken to the sounds of roosters and prayer bells now stirred only to the groans of the undead lingering on the outskirts. Their silhouettes swayed like shadows at the edge of visibility, waiting, watching. Imran hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken, his hands blistered from gripping the bat all night. Around him, survivors stirred inside the mosque, men sharpening tools, teenagers stacking chairs against the windows, elders whispering verses. They had survived the first wave but only barely. And if they were to survive the next, they had to act fast. "We can't just sit here," said Tariq, a former mechanic whose daughter had vanished during the night. His voice trembled not from fear but fury. "We need to fight back. Build something. A wall. Traps. Anything. Imran nodded. But not blindly. We need to learn about them. How they move. What they respond to. If we don't understand them, we won't stand a chance. Just then, a bang echoed through the silence, sharp and unexpected. It came from the east side of the mosque, near the broken courtyard. Everyone froze. Imran raised his hand. No one panic. Tariq, Hamza with me. They crept outside, moving slowly. The sound had come from the barricaded school across the street. It had been abandoned during the chaos. Now the front gate swung open, creaking eerily. Inside, a figure stood, limping, groaning, face hidden beneath a blood-stained shawl. Hamza raised a shovel to strike, but Imran stopped him. Wait. The figure collapsed. Rushing forward, they discovered it was Layla, the baker's niece. Bruised, exhausted, but alive. Barely. They're smarter than we thought, she croaked, her voice nearly gone. They pretend to leave. Then circle back. I saw them watching us, learning. Her words changed everything. These weren't mindless creatures. Not entirely. There was something more dangerous at play, a growing intelligence behind those dead eyes. Back in the mosque, Layla's survival ignited both hope and urgency. The villagers began working in shifts, some building barricades with broken carts and fencing, others making Molotovs from leftover fuel. Imran divided the fighters into 3 small units: lookouts, defenders, and runners. The lookouts would keep watch from the rooftops. The defenders would stay stationed around the mosque and homes. The runners, they'd be the most important and the most at risk. They would gather supplies from abandoned buildings, reach neighboring farms, and if possible find a working radio to call for help, if there was anyone left to listen. The first runner team left at noon, 3 men and 1 teenager named Sufyan, who insisted on joining despite the pleas of his mother. They headed toward the clinic at the edge of Norhill, hoping to find medicine. Hours passed. Only one returned. Covered in blood and missing a finger, the survivor collapsed on the mosque floor. They were waiting, he whispered. Like they knew. They were quiet, too quiet. Then they ambushed us. His eyes widened with terror. They don't just bite. They infect with a scratch now. It's faster. We barely made it out. This revelation sparked immediate fear. Infection was no longer limited to bites. A scratch, even minor, meant death or worse. The rules of engagement had shifted again. Imran ordered all wounds to be checked. Anyone even slightly injured was quarantined in the storage hall. It was a cruel decision but a necessary one. One mistake could doom everyone. As the sun dipped low once more, strange howls echoed from the forest. Not the low moans of the undead, but coordinated signals. Sure. Rhythmic. It was as if they were calling to each other. Organizing. That night the second wave came. Not a blind horde, but a coordinated strike. They came from 3 directions simultaneously, hammering the defenses with brutal force. The lookouts rang the bell. The defenders lit the traps. Fire and screams filled the air. Imran swung his bat until it splintered in his hands, then grabbed a crowbar. Bodies fell, some human, most not. Then, in the chaos, the worst happened. One of the barricades gave way. The infected poured through like a flood. The villagers fell back to the mosque in a desperate retreat. Doors slammed shut. Lock bars dropped. Screams turned into muffled sobs inside the sacred walls. They had survived, but just barely. And as Imran stood over the bodies, covered in ash and sweat, he realized the truth. Norhill was no longer just a village. It was now a battlefield. And if they didn't find a way to push back soon, they wouldn't just lose their home. They'd lose humanity's first and last stand. Smoke clung to the walls of the mosque like a second skin, thick and choking, as dawn crept over Norhill for the 3rd day since the undead arrived. The village, once vibrant with life, was now scarred, burned fields, shattered homes, bloodstains on doors that no one dared to clean. Inside the mosque, dozens of survivors lay huddled, exhausted, traumatized, and silent. The undead assault from the night before had taken more lives. The wounded were fewer now, but so were the living. Imran stood by the mosque's arched entrance, staring at the broken street ahead. He had hardly slept. His arms ached, his hands were cut and bruised, and his spirit was hanging on by threads. But he had to hold it together. For them. For Norhill. For every last one of them who refused to surrender to a world gone mad. Tariq approached, limping slightly, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his forearm. "We need to do more than just survive," he said quietly. "We need to hit back. They've made us prisoners in our own village." "I know," Imran replied. "But we can't fight blindly. Not with this few people and no resources. We need to outthink them. And just like that, an idea began to form. If the undead were evolving, adapting, then the survivors needed to evolve too. They couldn't match them in numbers, but maybe they could beat them in strategy. Imran gathered the remaining villagers and outlined a new plan. Set traps throughout the village, create a safe corridor leading to the river, and use noise to lure the undead into choke points. It was risky. But risk was all they had left. Work began immediately. Children were assigned to make noise traps, pots tied with wires and triggered by trip lines. Women filled glass bottles with fuel, preparing firebombs. The stronger men cleared and reinforced the old bridge leading toward the river, an escape route if things fell apart. Sufyan, the teenager who had defied the odds and survived his first mission, volunteered to scout the woods with binoculars they'd recovered from a hunting cabin. He returned with chilling news. There were dozens gathering in the forest. Not random. Formations, lines, spacing, even sentries. They're organizing, he told Imran. Not like animals. Like soldiers. That night they put the plan into motion. It started with the banging of metal drums on the far side of the village. Then fire flared from rooftops, drawing the undead toward the noise. As the horde shambled in, groaning and snarling, they triggered the first trap. Barrels rolled down the slope, knocking several off their feet. Then came the rain of firebombs. The streets lit up with flames, and for the first time the undead hesitated. Some retreated. Others burst into flame and collapsed. It was working. But victory came at a cost. During the chaos, a group of undead broke through an unguarded alley and entered a home. Screams erupted, children. Imran and Tariq ran without hesitation, busting through the door to find a horror unfolding. A mother shielded her twin boys while a snarling figure clawed toward them. Imran swung his crowbar with all the rage he had left, sending the thing crashing into a wall. But he was too late. One of the boys had been scratched. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The mother wept, begging for a cure for anything. Imran stared at the child, whose eyes already showed signs of change, dilated pupils, shallow breath, a slight twitch in the fingers. We'll quarantine him, Imran said hoarsely, though he knew deep down it was only buying time. By morning the fires had burned out. The ground was littered with charred corpses, undead and human alike. But for the first time they had pushed the horde back. It wasn't a full victory, but it was proof. The undead could be fought, controlled, even defeated if the right moves were made. Yet even as they caught their breath, new threats loomed. A distant noise, not groaning, not screaming, echoed from beyond the forest. Like the low whir of engines. Drones? Vehicles? Or something else? No one knew. But Imran felt a shift in the air. What started as a survival story was turning into a war. And Noor Hill, their forgotten village, had become the symbol of resistance. He looked around at his people, bloody, tired, grieving but standing. Still standing. And he whispered to himself, "This is where we make our stand. This is where the world changes." The eerie mechanical hum grew louder by the hour, rising above the usual groans of the undead. It came from deep within the forest, steady, unnatural, and chilling. Noor Hill survivors stood at rooftops, their eyes scanning the tree line, their hearts pounding with a new kind of fear. It was no longer just the undead they were fighting, it was something else. Something that could think. Something that could plan. Imran stood with Sufyan and Tariq on the minaret of the mosque, using the only pair of binoculars they had to watch the edge of the woods. "There," Sufyan said, pointing. Through the cracked lens, Imran spotted movement. Not shuffling corpses, marching figures. Undead, yes, but guided in rhythm, almost in formation. And behind them, strange shapes gliding low to the ground. Four-wheeled platforms, powered by sputtering generators, strapped with scavenged metal. Improvised machines. Controlled somehow. Tariq muttered, "That's not natural. That's not just hunger anymore. Someone's leading them." It was a horrifying realization. Somewhere out there, someone, or something, was using the undead like a weapon. Back inside the mosque, the mood had changed. The small victory from the night before had lit a fire in the survivors, but this new threat cast a long, cold shadow over it. They weren't facing chaos anymore, they were facing intelligence. Strategic control. That meant every defense, every plan they'd built might be anticipated. Outsmarted. They gathered in the prayer hall. Imran, Tariq, Sufyan, Layla, and the village's few remaining elders. Imran spread a rough map on the floor. "We hold them off here," he said, circling the center of the village. "But if we're being watched, we need to mislead them. Create decoys. Force them into ambushes. And we need to find out who's behind this." Layla spoke up. There's an old ranger station on the hill, past the river. It had comms equipment. Radios, maybe even a satellite link. If we can reach it. Too risky, said an elder. The woods are crawling. We'll lose people. We're losing people every day, Layla replied firmly. We can't survive here forever. We need the outside world. If it still exists. Imran nodded. Then we move. Small team. Tonight. Preparations were made in silence. 3 volunteers stepped forward. Layla, Sufyan, and Imran himself. Dressed in dark clothes and armed with basic weapons, they slipped out after sundown, taking the narrow trail behind the riverbed. The village watched them vanish into the forest, carrying its last hope with them. The woods were unnervingly quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the distant hum of those strange machines and the ever-present moaning of the undead. The team moved swiftly, ducking behind fallen trees and navigating with the faint light of a broken moon. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Every shadow threatened to move. They were halfway to the ranger station when they saw it. A wide clearing where dozens of the undead were gathered but not wandering. Waiting. In the center stood a large stake driven into the ground, and strapped to it, motionless, was a man. Bloodied. Alive. Layla gasped. A trap. Imran pulled her down into the brush. They're using bait to draw us out. They want us to break formation. To act on emotion. But Sufyan was already moving. He's still breathing. Sufyan, wait. Too late. The boy ran across the clearing, drawing attention. As soon as he stepped into the open, the horde turned. They didn't attack, yet. Instead, they closed in slowly, circling both him and the man on the stake like wolves around prey. It was a mind game. They were daring Imran and Layla to follow. Imran knew the choice was impossible. Leave Sufyan and the man behind or risk all 3 lives. But Norhill hadn't survived this long on fear. It had survived because of sacrifice and faith. With a sharp nod to Layla, Imran charged in. The next 5 minutes were chaos. The 3 fought with every ounce of strength they had, dodging claws, breaking limbs, freeing the bound man, dragging Sufyan back through the treeline. The undead resisted, but they didn't pursue far. It was as if they'd achieved their goal, to warn them. When the team finally reached the ranger station, bruised and bleeding, they found it mostly intact. The man they rescued was unconscious but breathing. Layla booted up the power panel and, miraculously, a light blinked to life. The radio crackled. And then a voice. This is Camp Redstone. Receiving transmission. Repeat, who is this? Identify yourselves. Imran stared at the radio. They weren't alone. Norhill wasn't forgotten. The world was still out there. But so was something else. Something guiding the undead. Something watching their every move. The static-filled voice on the radio sent chills through the ranger station. For a moment no one spoke. Imran, Layla, and Sufyan stared at the blinking signal light like it was a doorway to another world. The world they thought had vanished when the dead began to rise. The man they rescued from the clearing remained unconscious, breathing shallowly in the corner, but he had already served his purpose. His presence had led them here, to the signal, to the truth. Imran pressed the dusty microphone button with trembling fingers. This is Norhill. Survivors from the northern forest region. We've been under siege for days. Repeat, under siege. Do you copy? Pause. Then the voice returned, clearer this time, more focused. Norhill, we thought that area was lost. We've picked up limited chatter, but this is the first confirmed human signal in that region in over 72 hours. What's your current situation? Layla took the mic. The undead are organizing. This isn't random. They've formed patrols, set traps, even used bait. Someone or something is directing them. We believe there's intelligence behind their movements. There was silence on the other end. A silence that felt like someone processing bad news they'd hoped wasn't true. Then the voice said, "We need you to listen very carefully." What followed was a revelation that shifted everything they believed. The infection that created the undead was not purely viral. It had a neurological component, an unnatural intelligence that didn't just reanimate tissue. It communicated. Across distances. Some of the infected retained parts of their brain activity, and a few, a terrifying few, became something else entirely, conductors. These conductors didn't just survive the infection. They mastered it. They used the horde like soldiers, using the neural frequency embedded in the virus to guide them like a living army. Imran's throat tightened. Are you saying they're building a military? Not in the way we think of it, the voice replied. But they're coordinating. Adapting. And Norhill is at the center of their current movements. That means your village is more than a battleground, it's a test site. They're experimenting with strategies, measuring human resistance, learning from your defenses, watching how you react. Sufyan's voice trembled. Then we're bait? No, said Layla, her eyes hardening. We're a threat. That's why they keep coming. The voice on the radio continued. Camp Redstone is organizing extraction missions for strongholds like yours. We can't reach you directly, not yet. But if you can hold out for 3 more days, we'll guide a team in by air. You'll need to mark your safe zone with high-visibility signals. Smoke, flares, anything. And be ready. They won't let you go without a fight. Imran shut off the mic. He looked at Layla, then at Sufyan, then at the man in the corner. We've survived 5 days, he said quietly. We'll survive 3 more. They gathered their supplies, salvaged what they could from the ranger station, and prepared to return to Norhill before nightfall. But as they stepped outside, they saw smoke in the distance, not theirs. Black, thick, rising from the heart of the village. No, Layla whispered. Something's happened. They ran. The journey back was a blur of branches and breathless silence, broken only by the distant groans of the undead and the ever-present sense of being watched. When they reached the outskirts of Norhill, they saw the truth. Part of the village was in flames. Barricades had been breached. Homes ransacked. Bodies, human and undead, littered the streets. But through the smoke and carnage, survivors were still fighting. Tarek was leading a counterattack near the old well, swinging a metal pipe like a warrior possessed. The mosque still stood, though its outer wall was scorched. The undead had struck during the team's absence, and the people of Norhill had held the line, barely. Imran didn't wait. He joined the fight, rallying the villagers with shouts of return. Layla threw firebombs from a rooftop, lighting up the horde, while Sufyan helped pull the wounded to safety. It wasn't just a battle, it was a statement. We are still here. After the undead were pushed back once more, the villagers gathered in what remained of the mosque. Imran stood before them and shared everything. The radio contact, the truth about the conductors, the promised extraction. There was fear in their eyes, but also something stronger, determination. We know now what we're facing, Imran said. And we know they fear what we're doing. That's why they keep attacking. But now we have a goal. We hold Norhill for 3 more days. 3 days, and we live. The crowd nodded, quiet but resolute. And outside, in the smoke-filled shadows of the woods, unseen figures watched and waited. The war for Norhill was not over. It had only just begun. The air was heavy with ash and tension. Norhill had become more than just a village. It was now the front line of a silent war, a war between what remained of humanity and something twisted that wore the skin of the dead. Imran stood atop the mosque's rooftop with binoculars in hand, scanning the treeline. No movement, but he didn't trust the stillness. Not anymore. Behind him, villagers worked in silence, reinforcing walls, patching broken roofs, and laying out new traps across narrow alleyways. Tarek organized small teams of lookouts and torchbearers. Layla taught the women how to use firebombs and defend choke points. Children were taught to remain hidden, to stay close to the center of the compound. Every person had a role now. Survival was no longer a hope, it was a duty. They had only 2.5 days left until the extraction window. Camp Redstone's voice had gone silent, promising another transmission soon. Until then, Norhill had to stand. But something felt wrong. Late into the night, the temperature dropped unnaturally. Fog rolled in, thick and blinding, muffling the sounds of the forest. It wasn't natural fog, it had a weight to it like it had purpose. As if it was sent to blind them. To divide them. Imran ordered everyone inside. Barricade every entrance. If you see movement, don't engage unless necessary. They want confusion. As if answering his fears, a scream pierced the silence. Not outside, but within the village walls. The defenders rushed toward the sound, torches lighting the narrow alleys. Near the eastern homes they found chaos. 2 villagers had gone missing from the storage shelter. No sign of a break-in. No blood. Just vanished. This doesn't make sense, Tarek growled. They've never been able to get in without force. They didn't get in, Imran whispered. They were already here. The horrible realization set in. Someone had been infected and hidden the signs. Someone had turned inside the safe zone. Panic began to ripple through the survivors. Imran called for a full recheck. Wounds, bruises, fevers. Anyone suspected of hiding a scratch or symptom was quarantined in the basement under guard. It was harsh but necessary. That night they didn't sleep. Fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Somewhere beyond it, groans echoed faintly, soft and constant, as if the dead were whispering to one another. No attacks came. But that silence was worse than the screams. When morning broke, the fog hadn't lifted. Instead, it thickened, swallowing half the village. From the rooftops they could no longer see the forest. Not even the mosque's minaret was visible from below. Then as the sun tried to rise, the sound came, drums. Low, rhythmic thumps from within the woods. Slow at first. Then faster. Measured. Organized. Tarek's face went pale. They're not just coming. They're announcing it. And then came the second sound, metal scraping against stone. From the mist emerged massive crude wagons. Metal frames bolted with rusted parts and pushed by hordes of undead. They weren't charging. They were delivering something. One of the wagons rolled to the center of the village road and stopped. A shape stood atop it. Not a corpse. Not entirely. It was tall, hunched, cloaked in black rags. Its face was wrapped in cloth, but its eyes, milky white, glowed faintly. Around its head, twisted wires sparked softly. Its hands never moved, but the undead around it responded as if to silent orders. Imran, staring through the binoculars, knew at once. This was a conductor. It raised one hand, and the siege began. The horde surged forward like a tidal wave, but not blindly. It was targeted. Specific. They hit the weak barricades first, then tried flanking maneuvers, avoiding fire zones, using fallen corpses as shields. Some carried tools, axes, rods, even sharpened bones. It was a full-scale assault, like an army testing every crack in a fortress. The defenders fought valiantly. Fires burned bright, traps were triggered, and every entrance was contested. But this was no longer about surviving an attack. It was war. Near the west wall, Layla and her team were cut off. Imran and Sufyan raced through collapsing fences to reach them. They fought side by side, striking down the infected with everything they had: metal rods, flames, fists. It was raw, desperate combat. Inside the mosque, elders and children were rushed to the underground chambers. The radio equipment was hidden and protected. It had to survive. If Norhill fell, someone had to tell the world. By nightfall, the fog had lifted and the horde retreated, but not before leaving devastation. Half the outer barricades were gone. 15 villagers had been killed. 4 were missing. And worse, the conductor was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Planning the next move. Imran stood over the ruins of the southern wall, breathing heavily. Norhill was bleeding. But it was not broken. "One more day," he whispered. "Just one more day." The morning after the siege felt like waking up in the ruins of a dream. Norhill stood, but only just. Barricades were mangled. Homes reduced to rubble. The air carried the bitter scent of ash, gunpowder, and something worse: loss. The village had survived the night, but barely. Now, with only a day left until the promised rescue from Camp Redstone, time became their greatest enemy, and their only hope. Imran sat with Layla and Tarek in what remained of the central square. Maps, blood-stained and torn, lay spread before them on the cobblestones. The mosque, now the only defensible structure, had been reinforced again and again. Every able-bodied survivor was armed. Every window was boarded. Every entrance rigged with fire or steel. They had done everything they could. "What's the plan if the conductor comes again?" Layla asked, her voice low and hoarse. Imran stared at the map, eyes unfocused. "We kill it," Tarek scoffed. "Kill it? That thing doesn't bleed. It doesn't even breathe." "It controls them," Imran said firmly. "It's not just another zombie. It's their mind. Their commander. If we remove it, we might finally break the coordination. Maybe even buy enough time for Redstone's choppers to reach us." A heavy silence followed. Then, Sufyan stepped forward from the shadows, holding a small, charred notebook, one he had taken from the ranger station. "I found something. Drawings. Symbols. And this?" He opened the last page, revealing a sketch of the same figure they had seen, the conductor, with strange symbols encircling it. "It's been here before. In other places. Always just before full outbreaks. Whoever made this, they were tracking it. Studying it." Imran nodded. "Then that confirms it. The conductor isn't a myth. And it's not random. It's a weapon." The villagers worked through the day like soldiers preparing for the final battle. Firebombs were placed in the streets. Traps were set near collapsed homes. Steel rods, sharpened sticks, and even kitchen knives were duct-taped to farming tools. They didn't have military weapons, but they had resolve. And something far more dangerous: nothing left to lose. When dusk settled, Imran climbed to the mosque roof with a red cloth in his hands. He tied it to a wooden pole and hoisted it into the sky. A flare would be too dangerous, it could attract the undead too early. But the signal had to be seen from above. Camp Redstone needed to know Norhill still stood. An hour passed. Then two. The fog returned. But this time it came with sound, deep drums, distant and ominous, echoing through the valley. And then they saw them. The undead didn't approach slowly this time. They charged. Hundreds poured in from every side, smashing into the outer defenses with terrifying force. The villagers opened fire with slings, hurled firebombs and stabbed through wooden slats. Screams rang out, both human and inhuman. Imran led from the front, smashing skulls with a reinforced crowbar. Layla directed the rooftop teams, raining fire from above. Sufyan dashed between groups, delivering supplies and messages like a seasoned warrior. But nothing could stop the moment when the conductor appeared again. Taller than before, its cloak darker, trailing a mist that made the air shimmer. It stood silently as the horde moved with uncanny coordination. Every lunge, every flank, every sacrifice, it all happened as if choreographed. Imran knew this was it. "I'm going after it," he shouted to Tariq and Layla. "Cover me." He broke from the defense line and sprinted through a side alley, dodging a flaming corpse and leaping over a crumbled cart. The conductor turned as if it knew. As if it had been waiting. Imran charged. The creature raised one hand. Undead surged forward to protect it, but Layla's team unleashed a torrent of fire from above, clearing the path. Tariq followed Imran, screaming a war cry that echoed through the village. The two men slammed into the conductor with everything they had. Imran swung low, cracking the creature's leg, while Tariq tackled it from behind. It fought back with impossible strength, tossing Tariq into a wall. But Imran didn't stop. He struck again and again until finally, beneath the bandages, a faint crack sounded. The conductor froze. And then the undead stopped. Just like that. Dozens stood mid-motion, weapons raised, claws outstretched, and dropped, lifeless like puppets with cut strings. The silence that followed was deafening. Imran collapsed beside the unmoving conductor, bloodied and shaking. Layla rushed in with others. Tariq was alive barely. The villagers emerged slowly, cautiously. The streets were littered with still corpses. Then from the northern sky, a sound. A low, steady thrum. Lights appeared over the horizon. Camp Redstone's helicopters. They had seen the signal. Imran stood, covered in blood and ash as the choppers descended into Norhill. The village had held. The survivors had endured. And as the engines roared and soldiers dropped down with med kits and weapons, it became clear. The undead had underestimated Norhill. But the war was not over. The helicopters landed with a rush of wind and power, flattening ash and scattered leaves as their searchlights swept across the ruined village. For a moment, Norhill glowed, bathed in light not from fire or destruction, but from salvation. Soldiers in black gear dropped down in synchronized teams, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every shadow. A red and white insignia marked their shoulders. Camp Redstone Response Unit, humanity's last organized defense. Imran stood at the center of the square, shoulders hunched, blood caked down his arms, the conductor's broken remains lying behind him. He didn't flinch as the soldiers surrounded him. He only raised one hand and said hoarsely, "We held the line." A commander stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a weathered face with sharp eyes. "I'm Commander Reeves." "You've done more than hold the line," he said, glancing around the village, noting the fire-scorched walls, the homemade barricades, the burned husks of what were once organized hordes. "You just gave humanity its first victory in months." Tears welled in Layla's eyes. Tariq, still limping from the conductor's final strike, let out a quiet laugh of disbelief. Sufyan, filthy but alive, stood on a rooftop and raised both fists in the air. And below him the villagers, wounded, weary but standing, cheered. But celebration was short-lived. Commander Reeves stepped into the mosque, now transformed into a makeshift command post. The villagers gathered inside as Redstone soldiers set up equipment, patched wounds, and began scanning for infection markers. Then Reeves addressed them all. "You need to understand what's happened here," he began. "You weren't just attacked by a random swarm. You were selected. Targeted. That thing you killed wasn't the only one. The conductor you destroyed, our analysts call it a signal core, was likely one of the earlier versions. We believe there are others. Smarter. More advanced. Norhill was a test. A battlefield. But also a signal." He paused and switched on a monitor. Satellite images lit the screen, blurred but unmistakable. Movement. Not just around Norhill but in 5 other regions. massive gatherings, coordinated migration. And in their center, similar energy signatures to what the conductor gave off. They're preparing for something much bigger, Reeves said. A continent-wide surge. We've seen signs in abandoned cities, symbols, trails, artificial structures built by the infected. We don't know how far the virus has evolved, but we know one thing for sure. What happened in Norhill was only the beginning. The room fell into a stunned silence. Imran stepped forward. Then let Norhill be where we start pushing back. Reeves looked at him carefully. We'd like you to come with us. You, Layla, Tariq, the boy, Sufyan. You've seen things we haven't. Survived things we couldn't prepare for. You're not just civilians anymore. You're resistance leaders. The villagers murmured in support. The transformation was complete. Norhill's survivors were no longer just victims of the outbreak. They were fighters, strategists, proof that the undead could be resisted. Evacuation began at dawn. Redstone helicopters carried the wounded first. Then children and elders. Imran stood by the minaret one last time, staring at the village. It was broken, burned, bloodied, but it had stood. Norhill had become a symbol. A warning to the undead, and a message to the living. Layla walked up beside him. Do you think they'll come back here? They might, Imran said. But they won't find fear. Reeves approached them both. We'll quarantine the site. Study it. But the real work begins elsewhere. Norhill gave us hope. Now we build on that. As the last helicopter rose into the sky, carrying Imran, Layla, Tariq, Sufyan and the few remaining fighters, Norhill shrank beneath them. But its story, its resistance, had already begun spreading beyond its borders. Redstone broadcasted the footage worldwide. Survivors across the continent heard the tale, a forgotten village that fought back and won. And in the shadows of distant forests, in ruined cities and broken streets, other conductors stirred, aware now that the living would not go quietly. Inside the helicopter, Sufyan looked out the window and whispered, "What happens now?" Imran, staring into the clouds ahead, replied, "Now we take the fight to them." The war had changed. Norhill had drawn the line. And the world would never forget the day it all changed. End of Part 8. End of story. Ask ChatGPT.